Hello everyone, and welcome to week 15 of English 120. This week we're going to work on our research project. You'll actually begin to draft your paper this week. We're going to be reading The Valley of the Moon chapters from book 3, chapters 10 through 15. There is no Bedford Researcher assignment for reading this week, but I do highly encourage you to refer to all the pages that I'm going to be talking about in this lecture. Your assignments include a discussion forum on Valley of the Moon, Book 3, Chapters 10 through 15. There's 2 comp class to complete this week, Respect Academic Ethics and Avoid Plagiarism, although you can complete any of the open comp class research lessons and quizzes at this point. They were all due at the end of on the last day of class. There's no research journal this week. I just want you to spend your time writing your research paper. So for this week, we're going to be talking about Valley of the Moon, Book 3, Chapters 10 through 15. Please read the text actively and then find evidence from the text and outside sources to answer 5 of the following questions in detail. Let's try as a class to answer all of these questions. Why did Mark Hall say that the early American immigrants were of a gambler morality? Who is Venus, and why do the other women compare Saxon to her? What realization do Billy and Saxon come to about work? How does the goal of Billy and Saxon's quest change after they leave Carmel? Where do they go, and what do they observe about the farms they encounter? Who are Jack and Clara Hastings? Who do you think these characters are based on? What do they tell Billy and Saxon? Where did Billy and Saxon go after they left the Sacramento Delta Valley? When did Billy and Saxon pass through the Napa Valley, and what did they do there? Why does Billy return to prize fighting in Ukiah? Who are Hazel and Hattie? On page 370, Saxon and Billy realize what Mark Hall meant by his words about early farmers being gamblers. This is from chapter 9 and 10, where he was talking to them about the Valley of the Moon, the actual Valley of the Moon on the moon. What does the paragraph that begins, "The old folks schemed and gathered and added the land into the big holdings," and ends with, "and see our orchards," on page 370, what does that mean, and what do Billy and Saxon learn from it? As always, please post your initial post by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. for full credit, and respond to at least 3 of your peers' posts for full credit. We will only have one more discussion forum about the Valley of the Moon. There's one more section that we're going to be reading, and then we're done. You guys have done a great job with this text, and I do hope that some of you will visit Jack London State Historic Park. If you do visit Jack London State Historic Park in Glen Ellen, and you go on a guided tour with one of the docents, and you send me an email with a 1-page write-up about that experience, talking about your docent-led tour, you can get up to 10 points extra credit. I highly recommend it. Going to the park will really make this book come to life for you. All these farming techniques, all these ideas that Jack London's talking about in here, he put to practice on his land in Glen Ellen, and it's really fascinating to see it. Alright guys, let's talk about your research paper. As you know, it's 6 to 8 pages, Times New Roman 12-point font in MLA format. The first draft, and when I say first draft, I mean first really completed and clearly developed with evidence draft, is due on May 12th. That means a week from today. You will be expected to have an 8-page paper that is 6 to 8 pages of writing plus a works cited page. The works cited page does not count as one of the pages in your writing. That must be turned in on time by the end of the week, and I'm going to talk to you a lot about the process of writing your paper. You will need at least 6 academic sources. In addition, you can also use the Valley of the Moon as a source, or the portable Jack London, any of the other resources we've come across in this class, but you must use 6 academic sources beyond what I've given you in this class. The basic structure of your research paper is as follows. You're going to begin with an introduction, which will include your thesis statement. Then you will go into 8 to 12 body paragraphs where you will introduce subtopics. You'll support those subtopics with evidence, and then you'll introduce in the end some counter-arguments, what the other side would say to what you're proposing. Finally, you'll end with a conclusion and a works cited page. So let's talk a little bit about your introduction. Much of the work for your introduction was done when you created your topic history in your prospectus. So that's good news for a lot of you guys. An introduction should introduce your topic, frame your argument, and clearly state your thesis. See pages 237 to 240 in the Bedford Researcher for details on how to write an effective introduction. It says thesis, I mean introduction, sorry. You really want to make sure that you give it a history of the topic that you're introducing. That's why I had you write in a topic history in your research prospectus. So if you're talking about something like the earthquake, the 1906 earthquake, you want to talk about when it happened, where it happened, what an earthquake is, how it's measured, any kind of information about the background of the earthquake right in the beginning. But before you do that, you want to begin your introduction in a way that grabs my attention as your reader. One way is to begin with something like a surprising statement, maybe a statistic of how many people died in that earthquake, or by asking a question, or by by telling a story. Maybe you're going to tell an anecdote of a single person, the effects of the 1906 earthquake on one small girl, right? And what's great about telling a story, and there's information about it on page 240 in the Bedford Researcher, what's great about it is you can come back to that story in your conclusion as a way of really summarizing, really connecting the end of your paper to the beginning of your paper. You could reiterate, that story given what you've proven with your thesis statement. You can also lead with a quotation. Maybe you have a really great quotation that's going to grab my attention, but you want to make sure whenever you begin with a quotation, you have to introduce it first and then provide context for it. You always get the first and the last word in your paper. So there's a sample introduction here that talks about that frames a thesis about steroid usage in young girls and adolescent athletes, girl athletes. And I think it's really well set up, and you should look at it. It's a little shorter than what's going to be expected in the papers that you guys are writing. You're going to want to think of 1 to 2 paragraphs for your introduction. Once you have your introduction, you want to make sure that you draft your body paragraphs. So you can use your outline that you've created to draft your document. Translate your bulleted list of topics into full sentences, and don't be afraid to change the order of your ideas if you need to as you're drafting. Remember, the outline was just kind of a way for you to put it out there as a possible order. You want to draft effective paragraphs by focusing on a central idea. Paragraphs should have a topic sentence in which you make an assertion, offer an observation, or ask a question. Follow a pattern in your paragraph, just like we had patterns for the way that you set up your outline. If you're trying to convince someone of something, you don't want to begin. Say I was asking you for a raise, I wouldn't just start off by saying, "Hey, I'd really like you to give me a raise." I would tell you all the great things I'd done as your employee, and then ask, after I've presented that information, that evidence, then I would ask for a raise. So think about the pattern that you want to use in your paragraph. It can be different from the pattern you're using for your whole paper. Support the points that you're making by supporting it with evidence from a source. And we're going to talk about how to work with sources in just a second, but you are expected in every body paragraph to use quotations from your sources to support the points that you're making. Always, when you use the source, you need to introduce it by naming the author, establishing his or her authority on the topic, and using attributions such as according to, claimed, expressed, reported, acknowledged, commented, inquired, said, stated, wrote, pointed out. And then always contextualize your quotation both before and after. The final sentence in your body paragraph should draw a conclusion of some sort based on the evidence provided that supports the essay's thesis statement. So each subtopic that you introduce should be argued with evidence. You should support what you're saying with evidence and then relate it back to the thesis. Here's a sample body paragraph for you to look at, and you'll see when you read it that the central idea of the paragraph follows an initial question. The third and fourth sentences use evidence from a source to show the real cost of hiring contractors. The author of the evidence is introduced, and her authority as a source is confirmed by mentioning she's a professor at Middlebury College. The quote is contextualized before and after the quotation. The final sentence draws a conclusion that supports the essay's thesis statement. Between paragraphs, you need to transition. Transition words and phrases such as however and on the other hand that show the relationship between paragraphs and sentences. Transitions help readers understand how one sentence builds on another and how a new paragraph is related to the one before it. By signaling these relationships, they help readers anticipate how the information and ideas they are about to read are related to the information and ideas they've just read. So if you want to help readers follow a sequence, like a chronological sequence of events, use words like furthermore when you begin your next paragraph or when you end your first paragraph. In addition, moreover, next, or first, second, third. You can use words to contrast like however or although, or you can use words to elaborate on something by giving an example, by using for example or for instance. You can signal a concession, like I admit that, or of course, or you can compare similarly, right? Or you can introduce as a conclusion, therefore, and for this reason, or as a result. The list of these transitions can be found on page 236 in the Bedford Researcher. Sorry, 235 and 236. Finally, drafting your conclusion. And if you turn to page 242 to 244, you can see more information on drafting your conclusion. But at a minimum, your conclusion should summarize the main points you've made in your paper and tell us how these points support or prove your thesis. Remember, your conclusion is your last chance to leave an impression on your reader, and therefore it gives you a final opportunity to influence your readers. So just like when you begin your conclusion, you have some sort of a strategy, when you begin with your introduction, you have some sort of a hook or strategy to connect back to your reader. You can offer additional analysis about the topic you're talking about. You can speculate based on what you've talked about in your paper. You can speculate about the future of your topic, or you can close with a quotation. Maybe a quotation that offers deeper insight into the points that you've made in your document, or that sums up the points that you've made in your document, or that points to the future of the issue, or suggests a solution to a problem. You can close with a story. This works really well if you began your paper with a little tiny story and you end it with a new view on that same story. Or you can close with a question. This is a good way to invite readers to consider the implications of the ideas explored in an essay. It's a good way to, if you're calling someone to action, it's a really good way to end. And a really great way is to somehow link what you're doing in your conclusion back to what you did in your introduction. So throughout your paper, you're going to be using sources. You're going to use sources to introduce an idea or an argument, to contrast ideas or arguments, to provide evidence for your argument, to align your argument with an authority, to to define a concept, illustrate a process, or to clarify a statement. Whenever you use a quotation, you need to use attributions, and those are on page 252, to identify your source. There's a whole list of these. According to, acknowledged, affirmed, alleged. You'll need to cite your source by providing the last name of the author, if not already stated, and the page number in parentheses after the end of the quotation. So, for example, Pamela Koch argues education reform is the best solution for fixing our public schools. Notice that the word argues next to Pamela Koch is an attribution that introduces a quotation. Education reform is the best solution for fixing our public schools is a direct quotation from Pamela Koch, and it is found on page 22 in a book that's authored by Koch that someone would be able to find in the works cited page of this paper where this quotation is. Now there's 3 different types of quotations that you can use, and these are found on pages 252 to 254. You can use a partial quotation where you just use part of a sentence or even a single word, and all the words that are quoted are in quotation marks. Source information is included at the end of the sentence. Again, last name, page number in parentheses, unless you've already mentioned the author's name. You can provide a complete quotation, 1 or more complete sentences, and those are set up in the same exact way as a partial quotation. Or you can provide a block quotation. This is an extended quotation that's more than 4 typed lines of text. These are indented by 1 inch from the left margin, and there are no quotation marks. You still cite the source, last name, page number. Use block quotations sparingly. You should only use 1 or maybe 2 if you're writing an 8-page paper. But you must use complete quotations or partial quotations throughout your paper. Please know that also if you paraphrase one of your sources, you will need to also provide last name, page number after the paraphrase at the end of the sentence. You want to use quotations effectively. Whenever you use a quotation in your draft, you'll need to introduce that quotation, include the quotation, right? And then explain to the reader what the quotation means in regards to the point that you're making in your paper. If you look on page 256, there's an excellent example of how to integrate quotations into your draft. You'll also need to include a works cited page. You'll need a correctly formatted works cited page at the end of your research paper where you list all of the sources you've referred to in your paper in MLA format. On page 361, there's an example of an MLA formatted works cited page. Please make sure you take a look at this. It's very important that you do follow this exactly. Those of you who had trouble with citations in your annotated bibliography, please go back and look at chapter 21 and see how things are supposed to be cited. Also, you can always come see me if you have any questions. For comp class, you will be finishing up respect academic ethics and avoid plagiarism this week, but you can also complete the other comp class units that are still open: integration of sources and quotation proficiency, and the exit exam. Those will all be open to you. They are all due, all of comp classes due on the last day of class. All right, guys, this is the last 2 weeks are coming up after this week. In week 16, you'll be you will finish the Valley of the Moon, and you will do a peer review and self-review of your paper and your peers' paper, which will be due by the end of the week. Then your final research paper is due on the last day of class, May 26th. Everything for this class is due and must be finished by May 26th. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'd be happy to help you. I look forward to seeing you online.